psychological damage in trying to avoid the threat of insanity. You start to approach the very thing that you're scared of. Because it had tragically afflicted, especially my mother's side of the family. There seemed to be any number of people that had various mental problems, you know, sort of varying states of sanity. And there were too many suicides in my life, and that was something that I was terribly fearful of. I think it really made itself some kind of weight that I felt I was carrying. And I felt that I was the lucky one because I was an artist. And it would never happen to me, because as long as I could put those psychological excesses into my music and into my work, then I could always be throwing it off, you know.
We passed up on the stand. We spoke of was and when.
I was very impressed by transvestites, kind of pre-Raphaelite. There was something about the Edward Burne-Jones Rossetti thing that I thought, this purest, new energising of the British spirit. It was real teenage stuff. Lots of teenage angst went into it. And a guy that I was working with on costume at the time suggested that we go and see Michael Fish, who had a shop in London. And he'd just invented men's dresses. And to me, they looked very much like the gowns that were in Edward Burne-Jones Rossetti paintings. And I thought, well, that's perfect, because I got this long hair. At the time I had long hair, all kind of curly, and it looked like something interesting.
I laughed and shook his hand.
So I wore that around a bit.
And made my way back home. I searched for form and land.
And so Hunky Dory was the next step. Again, I don't think it had any kind of through line, but I think I was getting nearer to what I wanted to do, which is to create this alternative world, which is what I ultimately ended up doing with the Ziggy thing. And Hunky Dory was the first really stepping off this planet and going somewhere else.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen.
What happened on Life on Mars was it led me to the idea that what was happening for me is that this European take on melody against American music was something that I found just really kind of fascinating.
But the film is a sad thing for she's lived it 10 times or more. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those gay men go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the low man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, wonder if you'll ever know who's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars?
And it became more and more evident through my career, when you got to things like Heroes and whatever, that really was a soaring European quality over this fundamentally American black rhythm and blues thing.
It's on America's tortured brow.
And those are the two areas that really I found always really rejuvenating to keep putting together, time and time again.
In my hand.
That was terribly exciting. I thought, wow, I'm in America, I'm in Greenwich Village, and there's this guy playing me Loaded by Velvet Underground. This is heaven. And I brought a dress with me.
Riding a Studs big at Jim. You know,
I've joined the circus at long last. Yet again, probably. But things like Rock and Roll and Sweet Jane, I thought, God, they're really reaching a real climax here. Their work's getting better and better. As fate would have it, that was the last album they made together.
Sweet Jane, oh, Sweet Jane.
Among a number of films that made a deep impression upon me in the 60s, I think one of the most important is 2001, Stanley Kubrick. It was the sense of isolation that I related to and had very strong empathy with because of this suburban curse. And I think that, in combination with a number of other elements, is a pattern for a lot of the kinds of music that I wrote and the kind of performances that I gave. And probably predicted my lifestyle for the 70s. So I would blame probably all of it on Kubrick. In fact, his next film was essential for what I was doing, which was Clockwork Orange. Because what I wanted to do was create a culture around the music that I was writing, which was the culture of Clockwork Orange. There was something fascinating about this future nihilistic negativity, which I think most young people have a great admiration for that.
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly and the Spiders from Mars. He played it left hand, but made it too far. Became the special man, then we were Ziggy's band. Ziggy really sang, screwed up.
Now we start hitting problems, because I enjoyed the character so much, and it was so for me to live within that character that, along with the help of some chemical substances at the time, it became easier and easier for me to blur the lines between reality and the blessed creature that I created, my doppelganger. I wasn't getting rid of him at all. In fact, I was joining forces with him. The doppelganger and myself were starting to become one and the same person. You start on this trail of chaotic psychological destruction. And you become what's called a drug casualty at the end of it all.
Everybody, of all the shows on this tour, this particular show will remain with us the longest, because not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we'll ever do. Thank you.
I found I was in the studio with Lou. We wanted to work with each other, and I produced what I think was a really good album with him, because he felt kind of discontented and a bit disillusioned, and I think he was on the point of stopping writing. I don't know, but he was quite negative.
Holly came from Miami, FLA, hitchhiked away across USA.
But then when he felt that there were people out there who really admired him, and I thought he was great. I thought he was a wonderful writer. I thought, in fact, he was a poet.
Take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey, honey, take a walk on the wild side. And the colored girls say, dude.
So we did a particularly lovely album called Transformer. And there was a song on it called Walk on the Wild Side, which became a big hit for him. And I brought in my sax teacher to play the last solo, Ronnie Ross. And I'd had 6 lessons with him over in Orpington, where he lived. And he came along, and I introduced myself to him at the end. He said, you mean you're that kid that used to come and see him on Saturday afternoon? And he looked at me in disgust and said, because I had red hair, no eyebrows, and I said, my God. Well done. From that, I got quite into the idea of producing people, and I heard about a band that was splitting up that I also liked a lot, Mott the Hoople. And I wrote a song for them called All the Young Dudes, which helped for a short while anyway. I think they had a bit of a new lease of life. I think Aladdin was more in the area of Ziggy Goes to America. I kind of knew that I'd said all I could say about Ziggy, and what I'd end up doing would be Ziggy Part 2. I thought, well, you know, I'm very tempted to go further with this Ziggy thing only because it's so popular, but actually it's not what I really want to do. It's being drawn two ways into, should I go for the obvious commercial thing and do like the next stage of Ziggy, or how do I cut this? What do I do now? And then I've created this bloody thing. How do I get out of it? And as an interim measure, I did this like Ziggy Goes to America. I had an idea of... We're supposed to go through America twice, two ways, and I took it one way and it was okay, but by the end I'd become soul man, and I've been writing this stuff for young Americans, and I thought, I'm fed up with this set now, I want to do this soul show. I didn't tell my management, I just struck the set and I got another set built, and they brought the Diamond Dog show back through America and got like massive sellouts everywhere, and I took another show back with different songs, and it was just a white flat at the back and a little proscenium stage with little stands for the musicians to stand at. That was it. There was no show, just backing singers and a horn player.
They pulled in just behind the bridge. He lays her down. He frowns. Gee, my life's a funny thing. Am I still too young?
And we died of death everywhere we went because what's he doing? You know, he's wearing a Puerto Rican peg pant suit and he's singing all this soul stuff. Where's Halloween Jack and all that?
She wants a young American.
Like, all right, look, that's gone and we haven't even seen the show yet, you know. Oh, it was like real self-destruction, but I loved it. I had a great time.
She wants the young American, standing right through the pit.
Eventually, of course, when the album came out, it was very well received. The Young Americans became a very big album for me. I mean, I really sort of advanced myself. I sort of was tumbling over myself with ideas. I met John Lennon firstly at some Elizabeth Taylor party. Elizabeth, charming woman, then she got really kind of involved in coming down to Young Americans, to the sessions and all that, and I rather feel it's because she was probably trying to sell me on this idea of this film that she had called Bluebird, which she went to Russia and was trying to talk me into, and I really liked her. She was lovely, but the film was awful, the script was dreadful, and I didn't, you know, it was like really a difficult, rather embarrassing situation, because, you know, I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Well, I'm sure I didn't. I'm sure she's much more grown up than that. But she invited me to some party, and John Lennon turned up, because he wanted to meet her too. He liked meeting new people. And we got together and we got on very well, you know, and when I was in New York I'd always like knock around with him, you know, and he came along to the studio. Carlos had had a riff that he'd had in his head for some time, which I put to a standard called Foot Stomping by the Flares. Everybody young and old. But we used what became the Fame riff. That was our take, we sort of changed it a bit. And then, of course, I did the inevitable. When John came to the studio, I said, let's write something. I'm taking this chance by the horns. And he said, yeah, great, you know, let's do something. So, well, what should we do? You know, and then Carlos said, how about that riff that we did with Foot Stomping? So we played that, and we just started chugging along with that and making up stuff as we were. And John just started singing, I'm. I'd gotten back into the idea of real experimentation in music with an album called Station to Station. That the new sounds of Europe were really coming back to me again, especially the sounds of Dusseldorf, Connie Plank and Neu and Kraftwerk. And again, it was this kind of hybrid thing that appealed to me so much. The idea of mixtures has always been something that I found absolutely fascinating, using the wrong pieces of information and putting them together and finding a third piece of information. Always, again, it's the Burroughs thing. I mean, it's what our life has become in the 20th century. We live and assume our morals and our style from the fragmented pieces of information that we glean from the media. Nick Rogue does say that I took some of the character of Newton away with me from The Man Who Fell to Earth. The thing that I objectively remember taking with me was the wardrobe. I literally walked off with the clothes. And I used the same clothes on the station-to-station tour. The black pants and the waistcoat were made by a lady called Ola Hudson, and allowed me very easily to get involved with drugs to take me out of the pressures of which side I should be more scared of.
In a report handed up late this afternoon at the Hall of Justice, a county grand jury failed to indict popular British rock star David Bowie of felony drug charges. Bowie and 3 associates were arrested at their Rochester hotel this month. Undercover police officers had claimed they found a quantity of marijuana in their rooms.
I was having a bad time in Los Angeles in the 74-75 period, and I had a bad involvement with drugs, and I was able to kind of pull myself out of it, fortunately, because it could only have ended one way, and I just had to get out of it. So that's when I moved out of America, and that's the beginning of my Berlin period, when it was sort of reshaping myself and pulling myself together and finding out what I wanted to live for, why I was living and all that, finding that I really wanted to be with my son and start to find some satisfaction in life instead of always a desperate kind of searching. I just did too much, and I came close several times to overdosing. It was really graphically clear. It was like being in a car where the steering had gone out of control and you were going towards the edge of a cliff, and whatever you did with the wheel, it was inevitable that you were going to go over the edge, and I just felt like that. I'd almost resigned myself to the fact that I'm going over the edge, I'm not going to be able to stop, and it's it. And I started really getting very, very worried for my life, and I just had to get myself out of that situation. So I ended up in Berlin, the smack capital of Europe. Don't you wonder sometimes about sound and vision? Again, I really didn't have any idea until I got there that that's in fact what it was. And who did I take with me? Iggy Pop, who was trying to get off smack. So the two of us were like over there, but we actually did very well. We were very successful because I think we got ourselves out of that cluster of dreadful people that we found we'd been surrounded with. It was like, well, it's our own faults. We'd encouraged them and they were there, and so it's nobody's responsibility but our own. But it was a way of cleaning up our act. I will sit right down for the gift of sound and vision. And it was a long, slow climb back up again, It was very hard. Waiting for the gift of sound and vision. I was very lucky to be there at that time, mainly because it was undergoing, artistically, its greatest renaissance since the 20s, when it was definitely a cultural gateway in Europe. When I was there, the whole new German expressionist period had started. All the German electronic bands were starting to come down to Berlin and working and performing there. It was almost like a workshop, because it's a strange, singular place, Berlin. After the war, when it became sucked into the middle of East Germany, and it's an island in the middle of East Germany, all the industry, all big business moved out of Berlin. It just left big factories and warehouses that were empty. So what happened is students and artists moved in. So the whole place became like a workshop. And it was just a wonderful place to be in for that. Wherever it got into, get off and explore that area, which was kind of arbitrary, and you set a rule and then you have to stick by it. So when we were fooling around in Berlin, he would just go and say, oh, I think I'll go out because Berlin's quite large. I mean, it's like quite a few miles of it. And he would just take the U-Bahn off, and for like however many Deutschmarks he had in his pocket, and get off at some godforsaken town and just spend the day there and find out all about that town, because that's how much it cost to get there. You can apply that to writing, and that's where Brian and I came together, because we both had similar ideas on this kind of fragmented, cut-up idea of writing. And that's when we produced the Low Heroes and Lodger albums. I like the idea of the wall as well, because at that time I felt it was always necessary to be in a place where there was tension. And you couldn't find a place with more tension than living in West Berlin. I can see why, throughout this century, it's been the one place that writers have continually returned to, because both the negative and positive aspects of whatever's going to happen in Europe always emanate at some point, right from the 20s, from Berlin, right up until the 90s. It really was a miracle for me. But the thing that was most exciting about it all is that I found that without drugs I was still writing very well, you know, and that was probably the most rejuvenating aspects of it all, is that you don't need to get stoned out of your gourd to write well. You know, if you were a good writer to begin with, you're still going to be able to write. So that was wonderful. Realising that it was possible to survive all that and not become a casualty, I think, was just such an eye-opener to me, and it was literally like being reborn. It was an incredibly important period for me. I can't say it was like night and day that suddenly I was this different person. It wasn't. It took quite a long time. It takes many years to psychologically try and put back the pieces, but I think I did see light at the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't a train. By the time we got to Lodger, we got to a point where it was almost as though we were playing around with the musicians, and one wonders how far we were just pushing it.
Heaven loves you. The clouds part for you. Nothing stands in your way when you're a boy.
We would take like 7 chords and stick them on the blackboard, and then Brian would have a pointer, and just therefore the musician would just have to play the chord he was pointing at, you know. So I saw some very angry faces out there. I thought, what is this? You know, we've been treated like school children here. Are they putting one on us? I think possibly we were.
Other boys check you out. You get a girl. You say your favorite things when you're a boy.
It's almost a notebook, I think, Lodger, and I think a lot of our contemporaries drew upon that album as a source book.
African nightmare, one time moment for the hullabaloo. I slept to the nearest bar, and my chairman went too far. Went on, went for went to Sony, wonder how the dollar went down. Gotta get a word.
There's a lot of things which led to the idea of world music on it, and even the fracturing of lyrics and speeding of lyrics. Things like African Night Flight has kind of a British middle class rap feel about them. And a lot of the percussive elements were really strange, and the idea of using Turkish influenced music against rock lyrics. I don't know, we really did play around a lot on it. We got the band to do some extraordinary things. Rock, strangely enough, is something that I've never really tried to be in. I love rock. I only felt uncomfortable in rock because I didn't think I was very good at it.
Lost my job.
Not that I have any kind of derogatory thing to think about it. I love rock. I've got such a huge record collection still. But I never really felt that that was actually what I could do. I didn't quite know what I was doing. It had something to do with rock. I mean, I think I'm full of admiration for people like Keith Richards, who so much inherently live that lifestyle. And God bless him for waving that and carrying that banner, unfurling that banner. of every tour that I do, I always profess that that's going to be the last tour that I'll ever do. It's worn me out, it's boring after 10 months, this and that, but I am a performer, and I always have been. It's inevitable for me that after 2 or 3 years that I amass lots of little ideas that I've seen or read about or thought of, and I find that I'm writing a show again, and I think, God, that would look great, and if you did this, and if you coupled this with that, and if you lit this in a particular way and used it in relationship with this song, it would, and by the time those years are up, I'm bursting to put this creation back on the stage again.
Look up here, I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen.
I wonder about a lot of things that happened to me in my time if I didn't fantasize and create these doppelgangers out of people, that I wanted them to be something they really weren't. But as long as I believed that that's what they were, it gave me the energy to be convinced that I was worth doing it for. It's something that's often occurred to me that might be what I did a lot of, because I always knew to do artistically.
By the time I got to New York, I was living like a king.
I think that throughout the 60s and most of the 70s I was driven by as much as anything. Oh, it's a great creative force. That in turn is replaced by anger. When you ask where the money is, then you get depression, and then you go to Berlin and write really moody instrumental stuff. That's kind of the triptych of the 70s. Lust, anger, moody.
This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Roger Hearing. Coming up on the programme, a US federal judge halts the construction of the giant oil
The Canadian-American singer Rufus Wainwright is the best known of the Wainwright family, but his family has a fine musical heritage. It's been said that the Wainwrights treat the stage like their living room, and for more than 4 decades, the family have played out their family dramas in song. With intimate access, Nina Miskov talks to this talented family to explore where the song ends and the family begins.
Who the hell am I? I should know. I'm Loudon Wainwright the third, the patriarch. My 3 kids, Rufus, Martha, and Lucy, who are professional singers, their mothers were and are singers. The deck is kind of stacked, I suppose, in that sense.
Shut up and go to bed. Put the pillow under your head. I'm sick and tired of all of your worries.
Well, I'm Martha Wainwright, daughter of Loudon Wainwright and Kate McGarrigle, and I'm Loudon's second child, Kate's second child.
And Rufus is your brother?
Rufus Wainwright is my brother. He's my older brother.
We were fortunate to be born, but with the slight added value of coming from a very musical family. No more histrionics, no more college tries. My dad is a great singer. He grew up in New York and expressed you know, his opinion through the eyes that he was brought up with, and certainly focusing on the family right off the bat.
Late night faucet has got a drip. All you're doing.
Meet the Wainwrights, Rufus and Martha, acclaimed singer-songwriters, children of folk singers Loudon Wainwright III and the late Kate McGarrigle. Rufus, the Grammy-nominated creator of lush pop songs, has been described by Elton John as the greatest songwriter of our generation. Martha has carved out her own quirky musical niche. Both have followed the family tradition. Rejection, hurt, betrayal, all laid bare in confessional songs about each other. For all of them, the very personal is material to be translated into song.
I write about my life a lot. What's happened to me, the people that are in it. Songs were written by all the parties, you know. She wrote her songs, I wrote my songs. Rufus has written his songs, Martha's written her songs. You know, so that's what happened. It's an endlessly interesting topic.
What's different about the Wainwrights is the depth of emotion that they are prepared to lay bare. I first came to them through Rufus's songs, and one in particular, a poignant song of rejection and loss and revenge that speaks to anyone who has experienced the loss of a parent. In Dinner at 8, full of pain and bitterness, here's Rufus vowing to take his father down with one little stone.
No matter how strong, I'm gonna take you down with one little stone.
I mean, there was a period where, you know, my dad and I were pretty angry at each other, you know, both with my brutal honesty and his, you know, and his guilt, I think, over how things had gone. There was a dinner, yeah, and there was, you know, drinking involved, and I was just really cocky because I was in Rolling Stone magazine, and I kind of said, "Hey, Dad, what's it like having me bring you back into Rolling Stone?" You know, in magazine, and he didn't like that, which I totally understand.
Until those old magazines.
He basically said, you know, we'd had this fight, and he said, you know, you got to leave the house. You can't really be here right now because I'm so angry, and I did, and then I wrote Dinner at 8 after that.
Can you remember the feelings? Was it anger? Was it pain? Was it a mixture?
I mean, it was all of those things, but I think mainly, you know, having your father close the door on you is the hardest thing.
Song that I wrote was called the Lexi song, which is about my sister Lexi being born and me explaining that this is a dysfunctional family, but we all love each other, and your mom is this and my mom is this. We'll all try and get together and, like, let's be friends, and it's going to be okay, you know.
Did you appreciate the songs that were written about you by Loudon or Rufus? I mean,
And the nice ones, you know. There's an awful song written about me by Loudon, and I didn't know that it was about me.
You're still living here with me. I'd rather be lonely.
Because I found out when he was performing it on stage, and I always assumed, oh, this poor woman that this song is about, it's terrible. And then he said on stage, this song is about my 14-year-old daughter.
Everybody wants somebody, but I'd rather be lonely.
I think it's based on the year that we lived together. Now, of course, with the Loudon song, he goes all the way. You know, if it's going to be funny, he'll say something absolutely terrible because it's very tongue-in-cheek. But when you have to hear that, you know, when you're a young person from your parent, it's hard to hear.
How did you deal with that? What did you say to him?
I was upset.
What did you do?
I went on to write Bloody Mother.
That's what I did. Was that a kind of retaliation?
Well, there's a payback element to it. I don't know if it was my motivation, but certainly, you know, tit for tat, I guess, in a way.
Poetry is no place for a heart that's a whore. And I'm young and I'm strong, but I feel old and tired. Over fire.
I certainly don't think I'm the first person to, think of my father and my parents as being, overbearing. But the song really, if you listen to the song, it's about not being taken seriously by your parents.
You say my time here has been some sort of joke. some sort of incubating.
Over the course of a month, I sat down with the Wainwrights, Rufus in London, Loudon in uptown New York, and Martha in Brooklyn, to try to understand this generational conversation expressed through song. A conversation that began with Loudon.
Once you were a young man, but now you are old. You're over the hill.
My father, Loudon Wainwright Jr., was quite a well-known columnist and editor for Life magazine. He wrote a column called The View from Here.
Your songwriting is the confessional type. Do you think that there's a connection, that you've inherited that from your father?
You know, I've recently reread all his columns just a few years ago. He did a lot of different kinds of writing, but also he wrote about personal things. And for my money anyway, that was his best stuff. You know, the songs are related to our experience. Certainly in my case, I continue to write about what's happening to me.
But it certainly did.
Once hailed as the new Dylan, across 26 albums, Loudon's life has been told through song.
Yourself caught with less future than past.
And then in Greenwich Village in 1969, he met a wild Irish folk singer from Canada called Kate McGarrigle. They would go on to marry, and here they are, singing together on Over the Hill.
Heavy on your hands. You couldn't wait to be a man, and now you cry. Oh, it's so hard to laugh. And you
I fell in love with her when I heard her sing and play. Everybody fell in love with her when that happened. But she was a, exciting, tempestuous, talented, kind of crazy chick. So I made my move.
Smart man.
Well, I don't know about... Of course, that was a good move. Yeah.
When you think that what has come from those 5 short years, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, had you any idea that you were going to be starting this kind of musical dynasty?
No. I mean, you don't think, I think I'm going to have sex with this woman so that I can start a musical dynasty. It doesn't take a lot, really. I mean, really, you can just have a couple of glasses of wine, and the next thing you know, you've started a musical dynasty. And that's what it was. I mean, we weren't plotting to do that.
I say, looking back, I mean, the relationship lasted 5 years.
Yes, it was short and volatile and passionate and quite a thing. We didn't stay together, and there were lots of problems too. But we were in love, and that was a good thing.
I think it was these two opposing forces. One, kind of waspy, upper class man meets this wild Irish Canadian free spirit. They had a lot of fun, but it was also pretty intense.
My entrance to the world was heralded with music. Songs that told a happy story and a not so happy story. And
Your parents split up?
Yes, right as I was born.
I mean, within what,
months.
2 or 3 months?
Yeah.
Go leave. She's better than me, or at least she's stronger.
It was a very difficult time for everybody, and it took me years to kind of come to terms with that fact. Initially, I always felt like my sister and I were the victim and my mother, but I think it was also very difficult for my dad as well.
Because Kate had written a very painful song when your father left, called Go Leave.
Yes.
That must have been hard for you to hear that. And
It's hard. One would argue that perhaps it would have been better to have been more discreet, but on the other hand, it's the track that we were on, and you do get through it eventually.
No more am I for the taking, but I can't say that my heart's not aching.
Well, I don't think I knew the cause until later. You know, at first, to me, my mother's music was sweet, magical and beautiful and fun. And then, of course, as I got older, the subject matter became more clear, you know, and it was more serious.
When you were growing up, did you in some ways blame Loudon for the breakup of your parents' marriage? Was he the kind of villain of the piece or not?
No. I mean, because my mother was a very difficult person, too. Of course, it was Kate and Rufus and I, we were a trio, and that was my family, really, you know. She was sad. I think that how I perceived it was not so much that he was a villain, but I was sad that she was so sad, and he didn't seem to care as much that it was over.
Call me Mr. Guilty. Mr. Guilty, that's my name.
My mother was a woman who cried a lot like I do and was expressive of these feelings. And my father is not expressive, at least not to me, of those feelings. So I don't know, maybe he did. Maybe he was sad.
In terms of my villainy, I don't know that my villainy was, you know, we had a bad marriage. So who's the villain? I mean, it takes two people to have a bad marriage. And it was a long time ago, too. That's the other thing. My God.
Because of the songwriting of your children, that's been perpetuated. There's so many families that go on, but nobody else.
No,
has
we all perpetuate. It's not just them. I continue to perpetuate it too. It's a fun and interesting topic.
But that keeps going. It just keeps going on.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. When will it end?
Kate took her children home to Canada. And again, the songs told the story. Kate was close to her Irish music-loving family and the heritage she'd shared with her sister Anna. They spent their evenings singing and playing music.
You know, I think Kate recognized, pretty early on that both Martha and I had a gift and were willing to share it. And putting it nicely, we were total, stage hogs.
When you were growing up with Martha and Martha, sibling rivalry?
Oh, yeah, a lot. Yeah, no, there was a lot. We were completely at each other's throats most of the time.
But at nighttime, we had our bedrooms were across from one another. And I do remember both of us singing at the top of our lungs, trying to out-sing the other and see who would fall asleep the first, and of course I probably did.
Whereas I kind of played the Al Jolson card, constantly showing off and doing cartwheels and stuff. Martha was more, the Kurt Cobain character up in her room,
I watched him sing songs from musicals, and I just, I really looked up to him. But I think that's the chip on my shoulder that I've always had, perhaps as the youngest too, and I'm always, insecure and worried. It's a chip that I'm always trying to chip away at.
All your family have written about the personal relationships of the family, and you grew up with that. Your father expressed himself through song about you. When was the first song you ever heard about yourself?
There was a couple of songs. There was Rufus is a Tit Man by Loudon.
Rufus is a tit man, he's sucking on his mama's gland, he's sucking on the nipple, it's a sweeter than the ripple wine.
And then lo and behold, Martha and I kind of started our little thing, and we were kind of writing right back at them.
I never had your beauty mark, nor did I have your...
The first song that really kind of got me going was Beauty Mark, which I wrote about Kate. That was sort of my springboard.
As I said in the country, no, I did not have a fear of none to dress in.
Where do you draw the line? Is there a barrier where you wouldn't express something you wouldn't express?
Well, I've always tried to be positive and innocuous in the sense that I don't, I'm not there to bring anybody down. Martha's a little more reckless than I am.
When I write songs, I'm really opening my heart. I would say more than Loudon songs in a way, or Rufus songs. So it's really just more of an expression of that, of how I really feel. Nothing that I do has been thought out at all. That's why I keep getting into trouble.
But it's very instinctive, and you're venting, you're expressing your emotions.
Yes.
What comes out of you is you.
It's very much a true resonance of me in that moment.
I've always felt that the more you kind of live any kind of big experience in life, be it marriage or childbirth or death, that is where the big songs come from. Songs are kind of like a byproduct.
Do you ever regret writing anything that's hurt somebody or...
No, I don't. There's nothing I've written that I've ever regretted yet. But there's room. I'm only 40, so...
My room has always pretty much been, if it's good, if I decide that it's good, I'm going to sing it, That goes for some of the edgier material that I write. The point is to write good songs, and that's my job.
And Martha, too, found her musical voice writing about the family. Famously in a song whose title is too explicit to be mentioned at this time of the morning.
Well, the interesting thing about that song is when I first heard it, I thought that I didn't even know that it was about me. I assumed that it was about a boyfriend that she was with at that time and had written a lot of songs about this particular guy. And, whoa, he got his ass handed to him. Later on, I found out it was about me. So then I went, whoa, I got my ass handed to me. I mean, it's a song which creates catharsis, but certainly people respond to it. They respond to the anger and the hurt of it, and the intensity of it.
No matter how strong.
I suppose the most resonant song would be Dinner at 8.
I went to his most recent show when he sang it, and really holds up. It's a true good song.
It's a song that's written out of quite a lot of anguish. I mean, that must have been hard to hear that song initially.
I don't know that it must have been hard for me. I don't recall it being, oh my God, I feel terrible when I heard that. It's just, it was clear to me that it's what it was about, and, I didn't suffer from hearing it, if that's what you're implying.
I saw him in concert in March in London, and he introduced it by saying that he'd been thinking about it very deeply and saying that he now sees that it's a love song.
Mm-hmm. He would know.
And can you hear that it's a love song?
I'll take his word for it.
Martha, it's your brother calling. Time to go up north and see mother. Things are harder for her now, and neither of us is really.
Then in 2006, Kate was diagnosed with cancer.
I mean, there was a wild on-stage learning experience that everybody went through. But yeah, no, we decided to go out there and share our grief and really work through it in a very public way.
Martha, it's your brother calling. Have you had a chance to see father? Wondering how he's doing, and there's not much time for us to.
In this song, we hear Rufus speaking to Martha about their mother's illness. He reproaches her for not returning his calls. But Martha was on tour in London and heavily pregnant.
It's your brother calling, Martha. It's your brother calling, Martha, please.
I had planned to be with her at the end of her life, and I was supposed to have my first child and her first grandchild in Montreal, where she was, and that was all that plan was blown out of the water, unfortunately.
Even on the day you were born,
You know, and I didn't feel well, and I didn't want to do the show. I didn't feel well that day, and there was something a bit off. You know, I had to. Then I went to the hospital, and my waters broke, and they said, "This baby, there's something wrong, and he might have spina bifida," and it was just like awful. And it was the middle of the night, and it was just terrible. And of course, the first person I called was my mother in the middle of the night, and she was on a plane within 24 hours, I believe. You know, she just waited by the phone and then booked herself a flight. And at this point, she had really gone downhill. Her cancer had spread to the bone and to the lung, and, you know, she probably shouldn't have traveled, but of course she came. Father came around the same time. And I remember we took a walk, and I was staying in Baker Street. And we took a walk, and he said, "This is Euston Station." He pointed at this building, and he said, "This is where Kate and I lost our first child." Because she had traveled to London to find my father, who had sort of skipped off when she was first pregnant with their first baby, and she was 6 months pregnant, and she went into labor. And I think it was a very gruesome affair, and she lost the baby. And it was within half a mile of the hospital that we were at. So she lost her first child, and I almost lost Arcangelo. Going to London and going right back to that place, what she said was that this is what I wish had happened to me, you know, the fact that he lived. And I think great weight was lifted off of her shoulders, because she was always traumatized, of course, by that first loss. You know, and I think what was interesting is that once she met Ark, she had been holding on like a lot of people do when they're dying. You know, you're holding on for life and you're fighting. Once Ark was born and she met him, and after her first trip to London, she came back 10 days later to do the concert at the Royal Albert Hall. After that point, her living life was over. You know, she went back to Montreal and she got into bed, and that was it. You know, and she was able to stop fighting, you know.
Proserpina, Proserpina, come home to mama, come home.
The real song that she wrote for the show and that we all performed together was Proserpina.
I was at the Albert Hall that night, and it was an extraordinary concert because it was so emotional. Everybody was in tears. Everybody came together for it. And I don't know how either she managed to do it or how you managed to do it, because you'd not long given birth, and she was so close to death.
Yeah.
I shall punish the earth, I shall turn down the heat, I shall take away every morsel to eat, I shall turn every field into stone.
I get the feeling that, in a way, Kate's illness helped bring Loudon back into the fold, in a way.
Well, he was there too, you know, a few hours before she died, and I think he was there for Rufus and I, you know, but also for her too.
Well, I mean, it was terrible that she died. I saw her, you know, a number of times when she was ill. Kate and I had a short time together, but we had children and a lot of fireworks and songs and really good fun. And I did love her, so it was important that I was there, and I'm glad I went.
When you hear them, the Wainwright songs are still affecting, the raw emotion preserved on record. Yet in talking to the family, you realise that time has brought perspective. Their story is not so different from so many others. It's just that their private pain has become public property. If you look at the whole line, you say you had difficulties with your father, obviously your children had difficulties with you. Do you think that's just human nature?
Yeah. It's not easy being alive, and families are tough. Do you know anybody that's not had a difficult time? I don't. I really don't. It's part of the package.
The songs that my parents have written and that Rufus has written, and hopefully that I've written to an extent, are a direct expression of who we are, and that art or legacy that we've left is important.
Well, I would describe us as a very functional, wannabe dysfunctional family. We really all do love each other, and we have managed to stick together, and it's a real triumph.
Maybe to other people we're unusual, but I don't feel like we're particularly unusual. I mean, we're doing what comes naturally. We're performers and songwriters and singers and share the work with the people and get paid for it.
But that means that people think that they know you.
We show them ourselves. That's what it's about. It's look at my life. It's just like yours, right?
Meet the Wainwrights was presented by Nina Miskoff and produced by Barney Rowntree. It's a Wise Buddha production for BBC Radio 4.
News. Now on Radio 4, Martin Wainwright explores Britain's fascination with moths. Every night, over the warmer months of the year, thousands of moth traps are lit up across the country. Who are the people that run them? And which composer is creating a requiem for a moth?
Flame brocade, frosted yellow.
Moths are sort of known as the underdogs, aren't they, of the Lepidoptera world?
The many-lined, scarce black arches.
There's that lovely excitement of opening a moth trap. What is going to be in there?
Viper's bugloss, speckled beauty.
When you open that trap, everybody expects boring, grey, drab-looking things that eat your clothes, which is a complete and utter myth.
There's always a chance of finding something that nobody else has.
I'm outside a converted silk factory in the little town of Mere in Wiltshire, where I've come to meet a famous member of a very interesting community, the moth men and women. I confess to being a mother myself. I've been very interested in them since I was a boy. And 8 years ago, I finally got a moth trap of my own, which is basically a powerful light in a large bucket. What does it say about the United Kingdom that we're the world's leading enthusiasts when it comes to these little insects? I've come here to meet a man with a lifelong passion for moths. He's the son of a farmer from Accrington, the little former mill town in Lancashire, but he also happens to be one of England's greatest living composers, Sir Harrison Birtwistle, and it's his music that you're hearing in this programme. I'm especially keen to talk to him, as I've been told he's writing a large-scale choral work dedicated to moths. What on earth would a moth requiem sound like?
Pyronia, Tina Gamma, Togata, Umbra, Woodiana. I had a teacher at school. He said, don't try to find things which are rare. All the things that are obvious and common are just as interesting as things that are rare, and just as fascinating, and they all have the same properties. And you'll learn more from what you have as opposed to what you haven't. Something I remember quite vividly, a particular weather which had very low, damp, misty weather with the mist hanging very near the surface. And under it were thousands of ghost moths.
Gosh.
And most of them were females. They were full of eggs bursting. On the Children's Hour, there was L. Hugh Newman. He had something called a butterfly farm in Bexley Heath, Kent. And I sent for his catalogue. But the cheapest thing he had were some silk moth eggs. And they came, and they had been laid on a piece of brown paper. You couldn't tell how many, but probably the size of 2 old pennies, you know. And I put them in a drawer, and I lived in a very damp farmhouse. Nothing happened throughout the winter.
You kept opening the drawer and...
Yeah, well, in fact, I forgot in the end. I remember one morning I was looking, sort of woke up and looking, and the wall was full of these baby silk, they're called silkworms, moving up the wall. I mean, the whole wall was covered with probably 400 or 500, or maybe more. I didn't count them. And that was probably 9 or 10 months later. I can't remember that.
So it looked as if the whole wall was...
Yeah, but they were all, I remember they were all moving in one direction, like a fan, upwards. Yeah.
Do you partly like them because they're despised?
There's also the mystery, and all these wonderful names. Tinagma, and Togata, Umbra, Woodiana, Prolita.
They sound a bit like it composer's instructions to the orchestra.
That's right, yeah. Green brindled crescent, beautiful arches. It's a poem, you see. Luna underwing, little fawn. We know what a red admiral is, and a skipper, and but extraordinary.
The conformist, dusky clearwing.
Everybody's better at doing things than me. I just sort of have a great problem with, well, that's a good word, imagos, you see. There are composers who are imagos. They come into the world fully fledged.
Because that's Latin for the adult insect, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
imago?
right, yeah. And they come into the world technique and memory and, you know, and life's not been like that for me. It's been a little more difficult.
You've been an egg and a caterpillar.
Yeah, I still am an egg, I think. Maybe I'm in the larval stage now in my life. I don't know.
Right, I thought Jenny to this tree here.
Yeah.
Right, well, we've come a long way north. We're in North Yorkshire at Kilburn Wood. It's underneath Whitestone Cliff, the very dramatic escarpment between the plain of York and the North York moors. But this is an exciting moment because we're going to spend an evening with a collection of mothers in this wood, a sort of social mothing, and see what flies into the trap. We've got a couple of GPs, Charlie and Joy Fletcher. We've got a guy who works at Leeds Bradford Airport, that's Terry Box. And finally, we've got Jill Warwick, and she's a landscape gardener from near Ripon. I see you, Charlie, I'm amazed by this. It's like a military operation.
Oh, it is!
I thought it was going to be, just a few people gathered around one Mercury Vapour lamp.
Oh, we've had some events. We've had 10 MV traps set up.
Goodness. I brought you a quote, actually, with you two being. It says, "Maidens, like moths, are ever caught by glare, and mammon wins his way where seraphs might despair."
And who said that?
What are your views on that? That was Lord Byron, who knew a thing or two.
Jill, I thought we'd have that one up that ride. Sorry, people.
Good. Well, we're about a mile into the woods down a forestry commissioned track now, and we've come to where we're going to be trapping. So the cars have stopped and everything's being unloaded, and there's so much kit here. I mean, miles of cables, a couple of petrol generators and cans of petrol to go with them, and 7 moth traps, and they're like a great big washing up bowl with a transparent cowl over it, and then the light fits on top of that. So the moths come down to the light, go into the cowl, and can't get out, and don't want to get out because they're stunned by the light. And then inside, you fill the moth trap with egg cartons because they're the perfect thing for the moths to hide in once they're in the trap. So anyway, Charlie's gone off up into the wood with a trap, and Terry's gone the other way with another. When it's all fitted out, we'll be off, and the generator provides enough power for the thing to go for 10 hours, so that'll see us safely through till dawn.
So the fun is now, what are we going to find in the morning?
Yes, yes. No, that's the great thing, isn't it?
Well, there's some rather nice things that occur in this wood, things that Jill and I haven't seen. There's a thing called scarce prominence, which we don't get 30 miles away, which we're rather hoping for tonight.
As a woman, I mean, I would be a little bit reluctant to come to a lovely spot like this on my own. So to come with 2 or 3 friends, and then obviously pool resources as well. One moth trap is great, but if you've got half a dozen running, as we will be having tonight with the generators, I mean, we're just going to attract so many more species, so many more moths. And then you start pushing the boundaries of knowledge of the distribution of moths as well.
And you're staying here tonight?
Yes.
Brave man. And we're going to join you for a moth breakfast.
OK.
Not eating moths.
Indeed.
But counting them.
Yeah.
You know, here we are in the middle of nowhere. I mean, some people would be spooked, but you're happy to spend the night?
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy. You do occasionally meet odd people wandering around. So it's sort of the last place that you'd expect to actually see somebody wandering around in the middle of the night, but you do.
Well, it's dark now. It's getting late. The moths are coming. Seen them in the headlights. Seen them heading towards the traps. It's time to leave Terry here, all on his own. I mean, frankly, I'd be scared. But anyway, he's going to tuck himself into the car, check the traps every now and then during the night, and we'll come back in the morning to see how he's got on.
New Forest Burnett. Reed Tussock.
This late part of the spring is a great time for spotting moths, and all over the country traps are being lit overnight and new records of species are being compiled. And I've come to Dorset, where hundreds of thousands of reports are sent every year to the charity Butterfly Conservation. We're at the old dairy, and I've come to meet a selection of local moth enthusiasts. Hi.
Hello.
Here we are.
Hi.
Here are the Mothmen and a Mothwoman. And with me is, first of all, Phil Sterling. I've also got Zoe Randall here and Mark Parsons, who both work for Butterfly Conservation but are keen mothers. So what got you interested in the subject?
Well, I first got interested in moths when I started working for Butterfly Conservation, actually. I'd been interested in butterflies before, and we started running the moth trap at work, and I was communicating with lots of county recorders all over the country, and some of them were so enthusiastic. I thought, well, I'm working on this project, I need to have a go at this. So I borrowed a moth trap from work, ran it at home in the garden, and it's absolutely amazing. When you open that trap, everybody expects boring, grey, drab-looking things that eat your clothes, which is a complete and utter myth. They are just as beautiful, if not more so, than butterflies.
So, Phil, I mean, here in Dorset, how you command an army of what size?
It does fluctuate year to year, but I would think that in a very good year, we've probably got 50 or 60 very active recorders throughout the county. Maybe on a decent night in the summer, maybe 200 moth traps being run across Dorset every night.
This is a part of the world that we don't know everything about. There's lots to be discovered by people like yourselves.
Anybody can make a contribution. If you're running a trap in your back garden, you can make discoveries. I've been very fortunate enough to find a species new to Britain in my own back garden.
Goodness.
That happens.
Is that here in Dorset?
That's here in Dorset.
Which species was that?
That's got a long Latin name. It's a thing called Cosmopteryx pulcherrimella.
Why isn't it called Parsons? Parsons small grey moth.
That's one of the joys of moth trapping. You never quite know what you're going to get in your moth trap.
One thing that fascinates me about you guys is, I mean, I run my trap up in Leeds, and it's a kind of fairly solitary pursuit. But there's a social side to this. Tell me about that.
Well, there's a network of county moth recorders all across the country, and they collate moth records from their moth recorders on the ground. And quite often they will organise moth trapping events as well, on field meetings. So a gang of moth trappers will go along, and I've been out on one or two of these, and quite often it's people open their car boots up, and it's, oh, your generator's a bit better than mine. Oh, I like your fishing chair. You know, there's sort of friendly banter, and then they run the moth trap together, maybe have a beer or a glass of wine or something, turn the trap off later, see what they've got. Obviously, with the internet and things like that, there's lots of email chat groups and chat rooms going on. It really is growing.
When you mentioned the car boot, I was thinking if you could combine the Great British car boot sale with moth trapping, you'd be up and away.
Yeah.
And it feeds into professional science, doesn't it? So that these tiny creatures have actually proved to be important indicators of things that are going on more generally.
I mean, one really good example is that of the peppered moth. Once upon a time, the peppered moth was a very pale form, sort of white with little black speckles. And over time, with air pollution and the buildings and the tree trunks and the places where it rested, obviously these were becoming blackened. And if you're a white moth with a few dots sat on it, then you're going to be easy meat for, a passing bird or a bat or something. So these moths developed a melanistic form, which were black. So then when they were resting on buildings and tree trunks and various other places, they were then camouflaged with their background.
So evolution worked that the black ones survived more than the white ones.
Yeah. But again, now, because our quality of our air's improving, there are less melanistic, the darker form ones now, and the white ones with the little black speckles are becoming more prevalent.
The subtle beauty of moths and their tragic attraction to the flame seems to inspire wonderful language. I especially like this poem, which I read in the New Yorker. It's by Cather Pollitt. Come, bumble-footed ones, dust squigglers, furry ripplers, inchers and squirmers, humble in grey and brown, find out our secret places, devour our hearts. Measure us, geometer, with your curved teeth. Leaves lick at the window, clouds stream away, yet we lie here, perfect, locked in our dark chambers. When we could rise in you, brief, splendid, 20-plume, gold-spotted ghost, pink scavenger, Luna, whose pale green wings glow with moons and planets. At one with the burning world, whose one desire is to escape itself. That was the division bell for a vote at the Houses of Parliament on the police bill, and we've come up here to the Palace of Westminster to meet another enthusiastic mother, who the rest of her time is the Labour Member of Parliament for Bridgend, Madeline Moon. And I wanted to find out from Madeline what it is that drives this great enthusiasm for moths.
There are so many things that you can be afraid of in life. I never think that creepy crawlies are worth your terror. There are huge, frightening things in the world. And given that I'm now on the Defence Select Committee, I work at that end of terror rather than, something that's crawling across your floor or flying by you at night. No, get real. These are not frightening. These are actually exciting things.
Moths are very important as indicators. And I think there's some incredible statistics about blue tits consume, thousands and thousands of moths a year. But is it nonetheless true that most British moths are kind of small, brown, and therefore not particularly interesting?
Oh, golly gosh, not at all. You look at the tiger moth. The tiger moth is absolutely stunning, and its colours are beautiful. Now, this is a moth that is eaten by bats, but it has developed the capacity to issue a sound that affects the echolocation of bats. Now, how's about that? In terms of...
That's incredible. So it can baffle a bat's radar, as it were. I mean,
yes,
exactly like modern electronic warfare.
Well, it's like a bat sonar. It sends out a chirping that confuses the bat, so it protects itself. So there is almost a battle to the death between some moths trying to protect themselves and some bats trying to demonstrate their capacity. Now, when you tell children that, they get it. They can see that battle and that conflict and that battle for survival, and they are immediately interested. So you've got to be able to engage children in conservation. And when we've already lost 60 species of moths, and there are 70 plus on an endangered species list out of 2,500, there's nothing that happens in our lives that doesn't have a knock-on consequence within wildlife, and we have to always be aware of that. And at our peril, moths are important in terms of pollination. So if we lose our moths, our actual capacity to grow the variety of crops that we need to sustain us is also going to be lost.
And now it's interesting, you encourage the running of a moth trap in Parliament.
Yes.
Whereabout? I mean, not in the chamber, presumably.
No, we've had it in a few places. We've had it on the roof, and we've had it in Blackrod's garden. We've had it in Speaker's garden. And it's about really educating people that biodiversity is actually in the most intensively city centre. It's not just something that's about the countryside. Moths and wildlife, they don't just stay in the countryside. They are moving. They're always looking for new habitats and new places to find food. You know that Buckingham Palace, they run their own moth trap as well. And they had, back in the 1960s, they found the spiky boll worm, which is a Tanzanian moth. And in fact, the Queen had a visit from a Tanzanian delegation. They'd had a state visit, and it had obviously come with them. So when that turned up, it was sort of my God, where's this come from? But in fact, it
would have been that. I could just imagine the scene. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, the spiky bollworm, the orange footman.
I think there is something British about an interest in the natural world and collating. We are great listers. We like to know what is around us, and we like to know the difference between things. And I think we're incredibly nosy. And I think the world of the environment gives us free rein to explore our curiosity, to understand our world, and to list the differences. And that's a very British characteristic, I think, which is why once we began to understand what was happening around our own habitats and our own species in the UK, we started moving out, and we actually sent ships out to explore and to record and to bring back. And that's, again, something unique that we offered the world. Scarce dagger, feathered ear, the small lappet, bond's wainscot.
The UK set up its first national recording scheme for moths in 1967, but we've been interested in listing and documenting them for centuries. 1634, Theatrum Insectorum, the first British book to include moths, is published. 1742, the London naturalist Benjamin Wilkes publishes 12 new designs of English butterflies. 1748, J. Outfield publishes a 6-part natural history of English moths and butterflies. And in 1759, Lawrence Sterne wrote the famous experimental novel Tristram Shandy, here in Shandy Hall in North Yorkshire. The Lawrence Sterne Trust and Patrick Walgust, its director, have found an ingenious way of involving children in this challenging and complex book, and this beautiful house. It's a way that involves the death's head hawk moth, the largest found in Britain, whose markings echo the skull of Yorick in Tristram Shandy. One of the children who came in with his friends from primary school, Will Smith, who's now 11, is here. Will, do you remember this episode?
Well, we looked at moths and caught them and released them, and it was some of it to help people to sort of understand moths more and not be frightened about them and not really splat them when they see them and think, oh, it's a moth, and just take care of it and study it. And
do you know the names of any that you've seen over the years?
I've seen the garden tiger one.
That's a beautiful moth.
Yeah, it is. It's quite good markings, isn't it? I've seen the white ermine one, which is a quite cute little white fluffy one, obviously.
Did it come across to you, when Patrick came in to talk, just from a little thing like a moth? There are so many things, much more important things that can be discovered, about medicine and about the environment and all that kind of thing.
Well, obviously when he first came in, I just thought that a moth was a little thing that flew around. I didn't realise that it was so fascinating and complicated as it is. When I found out gradually that there was so much more to know, I just got more interested.
And I know this is a terrible question for a grown-up to ask you, Will, but what are you going to do? With all this curiosity you've got in your head, have you thought about what you're going to do in life?
Ooh, not to this point yet. Might lead to moths, who knows?
I have this idea of writing what I would call a requiem and using the names of extinct moths as a sort of metaphor for things which are lost, but it also belongs to this unfulfilled thing within me. So it is a sort of statement for, I hope, eternity. So it's got a stamp about me. It's a signature about a subject matter But I can use all the Latin names of the extigmos like you would in a requiem, like the Latin...
In the Mass?
Yeah, yes. But there's another connection, because Robin Blazer wrote a collection of moth poems about a time when he lived with some friends, and they all said there was a strange sound somewhere in the house. and they couldn't identify what it was and where it was coming from. And in the end, he discovered there was he said a large moth, he lived in Canada, was trapped under the strings of a piano, and it was trying to get out.
And hitting the...
And it was setting the lower strings vibrating.
Goodness.
So I shall set this moth requiem for female chorus, 3 harps and an alto flute. I will use fragments of his poems as well, just words or whatever, utterances, as well as the Latin names.
The moth kiss has 2 languages, the one everyday, dusty, habitual, and part delight, the other an unexpended myth, washes against the glass, to be abstract, untied by the friendship, the moment caught.
So that's one of my ambitions. It is just a requiem, which is both personal, anecdotal, and a metaphor for things that are no longer here.
Terry, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad to see you safe and sound and all in one piece.
Absolutely, yeah.
So look, it's just after 7 o'clock.
Indeed. Temperature dropped quite quickly. It was down to +4 at about 2 o'clock this morning.
How do you know what it was like at 2 o'clock? You should have been asleep.
I should have been.
You've been all on your own overnight. Do you quite like that side of it here out in the middle of the countryside?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I do. It's one of the reasons I think I've sort of moved away from bird watching to moth trapping. There's too many people bird watching, they get in the way.
Yes.
And it's very competitive. And, you know, I'm not into that at all.
Well, should we go and see what is lurking in the egg cartons?
Absolutely.
So we're going to watch the procedure now. So Jill's getting ready with her camera.
I only want the chair for the scribe.
Oh, and you've got... Charlie is like Steven Spielberg or somebody. He's got a collapsible director's chair and a clipboard and a pen.
Lid coming off.
So the lid comes off, and now we can see inside this huge bowl all the egg cartons. That's I recognise that. Is that a swallow prominent or no?
That's a swallow prominent.
Yes, that's a beautiful moth. Lovely colouring.
And scarce prominent, which for this part of the world is a fantastic species.
So that's the one that you were hoping. I know last night you were talking.
That's the one we were hoping.
There's the excitement of seeing it, which I think everybody shares, a kind of hunting thing, but also it's got a lot to tell us. And one day we might be able to find out why the distribution is as it is, and whether that has any implications for our own distribution.
Right, what's under the old sheet?
Oh, that's nice.
Lunar marbled brown.
That's beautiful.
Gorgeous name for a very attractive moth.
And that's basically greys and whites and a little bit of black, but what a lovely, lovely patterning. That really shows the beauty of moths, I think. You know, it's not showy, it's just lovely, delicate.
Well, the common quaker probably is what most people think of moths, and then you just compare that with the lovely lunar marble brown or the scarce prominent. People don't know what they're missing.
Good. Well, the traps are packed away. They're just winding up the cables and folding the sheets. We've got some lovely moths. The scarce prominent, especially, but also that lunar marble brown is an absolutely wonderful moth in terms of its pastel, delicate colouring and patterning. Time for breakfast now, and the day's hardly begun. It's only just after 8 o'clock in the morning. It's been an excellent night. These days, there's an increasing enthusiasm for moths. You can even download a full guide to all the British species onto your phone. And once you realise there are hundreds of thousands of these creatures in the night, unseen but all around us, it's irresistible. New discoveries are still being made. The Natural History Museum recently came across a moth that's both male and female at the same time. And as to the meeting our clothes, well, only 0.02% of our moths do that. But according to Stuart Hine of the Natural History Museum, that little minority is doing rather well at the moment, because we're apparently wearing more natural fibres and ever more cashmere, like Harrison Birtwistle.
A couple of years ago, we had a lot of cashmere, expensive cashmere, absolutely ruined, and my favourite sweater was completely riddled with holes.
But it's very nice of you to write them a requiem.
Requiem for a Moth was presented by Martin Wainwright. The programme was produced by Ian Chambers, and it's a Just Radio production for BBC Radio 4. David Tennant heads the cast of a new comedy in a moment. The Go-Betweenes is about